Housing market prediction for 2024. When will home prices be affordable again? Let's take a look at that, what that means. Renting versus buying a home. Has the math changed for today's Bay Area real estate market? We're going to talk about this quite a bit because this works for both people that are renting and wanting to buy their first place. And also, quite frankly, if you're an investor and you're trying to figure out this cash flow thing in the Bay Area, we'll talk about that. Next, hottest Bay Area real estate market is in this quiet neighborhood. Interesting how the article pointed a particular neighborhood out, but there were actually many other neighborhoods and cities that did better than this one. We'll take a look at that and we'll discover which one is that and why over the last couple of years. And last but not least, Bay Area home sales shot up 25% in February. Could the surge last? Let's go over all of these together. And feel free to leave anything in the comments. This is a live stream, so I will address everything that is sent here during the course of our video. Now, the county that is the top one in terms of the one that requires the most income is San Mateo County. Becomes only county in California where you need to earn more than $500,000 annually to afford a medium-priced home. So there's a lot of things to point out about this. For a long time, it kind of also just shows this is the most prime location throughout the entire Bay Area, quite frankly, throughout the entire state of California. Why is that? It has always been the case, and it's really happened a lot more since 2008, 2009 time. Because if you think about it, the big job cluster, the big job hub is a combination of San Francisco. You see really a lot of the big AI tech boom continues to start up there, to continue to be out there. So that's one big hub. And then you still have the big tech cluster in the South Bay that continues to do well. So fortunately, my Hillsborough listing got in contract this week. So super happy for my clients. Thank you so much for the trust and the patience for that. But the people that were living there, it was the people that chose to live there. It was mainly two sets of people. One were people that were living in nearby areas like a Burlingame, San Mateo, Millbrae. They were smaller homes, smaller lots, and they wanted to get a place that had a bigger location, a bigger space. There's not many other alternatives that you have in that mid-peninsula. Now, where do they usually work? Most of them still work in San Francisco. They have to be in the office a couple times. A partner may work in the South Bay, maybe Menlo Park or Palo Alto, these kind of areas. So that's kind of one big demographic. The other demographic are people from even the South Bay were considering options there because the equivalent of Hillsborough from the peninsula, if you were to try to find something in the South Bay, which area would it be? Remember, you got to think about two things: good location and big lots. And the answer for that would be Los Altos. Los Altos Hills are also the comparisons. Very, very similar. Like good schools, bigger lots than average, good location. It's not too far south, like a Saratoga, Los Gatos. And so Los Altos is equivalent. So a lot of people there have been looking for Los Altos for a long time, haven't had much success, tried to also expand to Hillsborough, but don't really understand Hillsborough as much. But they also wanted to at least have one extra region that could maybe see an extra one or two homes a week. And so those are the reasons why. But the idea, the thing I catch out of this is a combination of things. You can obviously look at it from a negative perspective, but I look at it, quite frankly, from a positive perspective too, an incredible perspective. The fact that these are still happening, the fact there are still so many people buying in San Mateo County just shows how much a lot of people are earning to be able to afford in these areas, right? Combination of their earnings, but also combination of how much stock that they have when it comes to these different companies. And it doesn't have to be all these really famous ones. Like, we're not even talking about the ones at NVIDIA or the ones at Meta, which had done 4x plus in the last 18 months. We're talking about just all sorts of variety of companies that you may not have known about, even if their stock price has been relatively consistent for the last couple of months or years. Remember, people keep accruing more and more stock. That's part of your comp package. Now, a lot of people don't actually count that as their income. They just wait till they invest, and then now they count it as an asset. But a lot of people keep accruing this over time. So as long as the tech market and the tech industry doesn't crater, people are accruing a significant amount of stocks and a significant amount of income and a significant amount of assets as they just wait. And so that's why you see these things happening. They don't necessarily have to make this kind of money, but they may also just have this component that of the asset side of things that continues to grow and build by even just waiting and not doing anything. So congratulations, quite frankly, San Mateo County. It still is one of the most popular locations, but a lot of the growth that you guys saw from my market update on Monday or on Tuesday, it isn't the hottest county per se, but it is still the highest price for a combination of those things I brought up, the location, and quite frankly, it's a very small county when it comes to housing. Like you don't see very much new things that can be built there because it is so landlocked and so protected. So that's part of the reason why things are happening in that particular area. Now, housing market prediction for 2024. When will home prices be affordable again? I don't know. This is a very interesting thing. This is a really interesting thing because there's so many different factors of this. When you ask different people, you're going to get two completely different results right now. You're going to get two completely different buckets. You have one bucket, which people that are working, which is still a heavy majority of people that are working. Most of those are doing better than ever, right? Because the stock market, as you can see, is at all-time record highs for the general index. Of course, there are unfortunate individuals that their companies are just not doing that well from a stock perspective. So you have a pool of people that are doing better than ever. And those are the people that are actively buying. Those are the people that are pushing up home prices. They don't care, and it does not matter about appraisals because they're putting so much money down. And all of these people waiting for lower rates, they don't need to wait for lower rates because you can just buy with 40, 50, 60% down, which is a lot of people doing at these competitive prices to then shrink the loan size. So that loan amount is not as important, and that monthly is just significantly less. And so you have that pool. You have the other pool, which is happening, unfortunately. There are a lot of people, let's say in the biotech field, let's say in maybe traditional like SaaS tech that's not able to turn their company using AI, right? Like these companies, they're not doing as well. And they've had layoffs. And while the SaaS industry in general has done better now than before, but the biotech industry is still not doing well. Like a lot of PhDs and a lot of scientists, they're not able to find much work because the amount of investment into that arena is significantly less. And so you do have a portion of individuals that have been struggling, and they've been struggling for some time. So you're going to have both of those things. But the other thing that's unknown is, will interest rates actually go down? Will you have a Fed cut or not? That's been hopeful that we're supposed to have a few cuts throughout the year. But as you can see, even without the rate cut, like the stock market is at all-time record highs. Home prices are doing very, very well, right? Like imagine if there was a rate cut actually. Who knows how much competition and how much more level of interest there will be when now more and more people can stomach or mentally be able to prepare for sub 6% interest rates. So the reality is this. I don't know when these quote unquote affordable housing will be, especially in the areas like the Bay Area, like Seattle, because the tech companies in general have done so well and the general market has done so well. So people simply divest from their stocks and their investments. They put more money down, they buy a place, and that's what you see right now. So we'll see how this ultimately progresses. I've talked a little bit about the NAR settlements, and we can certainly have a private conversation what this means for you. This will be something happening potentially in the mid parts of July. There will be some new rules that are in place at that time, but for the next 3 months or so, not much will be changed. But in general, you can see, right, like a lot of the places in, as I mentioned, these that are more correlated with tech have done very, very well. Now, let's talk about the next thing, renting versus buying. Has the math changed for today's Bay Area real estate market? Well, rent versus buy calculators show for San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, and Fremont. Let's talk a little bit about this. I'm going to give you some perspective, and then you'll understand a little bit more. Spring is a popular time to buy and sell homes, but with a recent report out showing renting is still cheaper than buying across most of the U.S., including the notorious expensive Bay Area, is taking the plunge into homeownership the right move right now. Let's take a look at some of these. Mortgage rates have come down from the highs set last fall, but are still more than double the 3% rates of 2021. That's a long time ago now, to be fair. That was over 3 years ago. But I want you to kind of keep in mind, right now, the rates are around plus or minus 6.5%. Now, does that mean your monthly payments, just because your rates are double, means it is 2x, which is 100%? The answer is no. Each 1% increase is equivalent to about 8 to 10% purchasing power difference. So it's theoretically about 35% more if all things were equal versus these really low numbers, kind of historic numbers back in 2021. Does not mean nobody can buy. It means just factor that in and just this is the new normal. It's been like this for a long time. Don't expect things to drastically change, but that's something to be mindful of. Now, we all know how much things cost to rent here in the Bay. We also know the math of buying a place. And even then, you can see while the cost of owning is always going to be higher than the cost of renting. And that's for a variety of reasons. One, there's only so many homes in the area. Two, at the end of the day, if you're renting, you are ultimately just paying the landlord versus if you're buying, you're investing and buying it for yourself. There's all these other tax benefits that I'm not going to get into now. There's all these other benefits of the sales side of things too. So the total returns actually has been quite attractive for most over a period of time, especially when buying, since you're using certainly a mortgage to be able to have higher leverage of owning a place that you don't have that capacity or that ability when you're buying just traditional stocks. So these are all certain things that are important. But even then, even though buying has always been more expensive and will continue to always be more than rent, it's still not even a simple answer for the individual whether renting versus buying will make sense or not make sense when the kind of the cutoff period is. Typically, the reason for this is because when you just do the math of renting versus buying, if you are too conservative on how much things typically appreciate over time, you may completely miss the ballpark and miss everything altogether. And we'll go over an example momentarily of like how much has the real estate market actually increased over the last month, over the last few years. And so that's been the biggest issue that most people have done in their math equation. Because many times a lot of people like to overestimate how much things may be on one category versus underestimating things on the other. For example, what is the actual average increase of homes throughout the last X amount of years? Sure, you can point it to 2010. You can point it to 2020. You can point to whatever artificial number you want to point it to. Why don't you point it for an extended period of time? Like, how have the numbers been played out through that time, right? And so while you can be conservative, you can't be like making like absolutely complete wrong estimates or wrong numbers, because then that would really push your renting equation to forever renter, which as you can see, isn't a good strategy either. So typically when it comes to long-term appreciation of assets, depending on when you compare it to, single family has appreciated between 7 to 8% a year over decades. Townhomes have been plus or minus 4%. Condos have been plus or minus 2%. Now, of course, you can look at different regional markets, but in average, that kind of gives you some level of ballpark what the medium and what these kind of figures are. Either way, the key about it and the real answer about renting versus buying is not about these math calculators that are all estimates anyways. The end of the day is how long do you plan to be in an area? Because if you're going to be renting and you're really not sure, let's say you're going to move from San Francisco to San Jose to the East Bay to XYZ, and your life is just all over the place, you should be renting because you got to figure things out internally. Or if you're like, look, I'm not even going to be in the Bay Area for the next year. I'm going to move to New York. I'm going to move back to India. I'm going to move to Texas. I'm going to move wherever the heck you're going to move to, then you should not be buying. Because the key about owning in the Bay has always been the same. The longer it is, the more likely you're going to make generally money. And you need time to accrue that. It's just like if you bought a stock today and you're like, all right, you know what? I'm going to sell it tomorrow. I want to make money though. I'm just going to flip it tomorrow. Like the likelihood of that, even if it's a great company, is more of a crapshoot. But over time, it's going to be more consistent, right? And you have a higher likelihood of doing well. So that's the same mentality. So the key for most is if you plan to stay in the area for at least 3+ years, it generally makes sense to buy. And it's really that simple because your alternative is just do the math. How much would you be paying in rent for 3 years? So even if the market was flat, as in nothing happened, you're probably better off owning instead of renting. So that's the general math. Now, the longer it is, the better, the likelihood is even greater that you're going to do better, right? Because even to give you some perspective, even in the worst real estate recession in history, so we're talking about the worst in history, it took about 3 to 4 years to fully recover. So if you're the unluckiest person on earth and you bought at the peak of things, it took 3 to 4 years to then, it dipped really bad for a bit, and then it kind of recovered and eventually hit that number and surpassed that. And so that's been the history of, and that was the worst real estate recession in history. And so if that gives you some level of confidence, while I cannot time things, neither can certainly you, then you would potentially make that move. So that's the real solution for most when it comes to buying in the area. So that's the real break-even part. That's the real thing to do. So as you can see with these numbers, like this is like just makes no sense, right? 20-year break even when it comes to this. Like it all depends on what is the level of growth of it. Where are you buying? Are you really comparing the like renting in the same exact location versus another? Because that's the big difference too. Like you can rent in Mountain View today. Doesn't mean you're going to buy Mountain View. And that doesn't mean you can even afford to buy Mountain View. You may buy in San Jose, right? So these are different solutions that could work. But at the end of the day, typically the math equation, especially with how things have done over the last several decades, is what it is. As in owning for a couple of years generally makes sense. Next, why this quiet neighborhood has become one of the hottest real estate markets in the Bay Area. Kind of interesting and some things to point out. In this case, they pointed out a specific neighborhood in Walnut Creek. Walnut Creek has actually always been a really good area. Not a lot of people know about it just because most of the people that are working in Walnut Creek are typically those that are working in the city. That's going to be the biggest driver of employment. Like imagine if you're to drive from Walnut Creek to the South Bay for work, that is a terrible, terrible commute. So that's a big job hub, which is San Francisco. It's also a big, decent connection to those that work in Oakland. And Walnut Creek itself has some offices, but not that many relative to all those other options. But because of the price of what it is, it's been very attractive, especially for those that have been moving during COVID time. Because during COVID time, especially San Francisco, right, the places that were in a proximity to San Francisco or that had some commute, those are the biggest drivers of people to like move further out. Especially there was so much flexibility, and quite frankly, how much you were renting in San Francisco, you had lots of options all over. But take a look at this. It wasn't actually Walnut Creek that was the biggest winner. Look at most of these cities. Most of it is Fremont, right? Fremont won a lot. Fremont. Hayward was up there. Hayward Highland, super underrated place. Not a lot of people know about the Hayward Hills, right? Because of a rap of people thinking about what Hayward means. But here is actually a really quiet area, super, super nice, especially for the money that you can buy for larger homes. If your budget is plus or minus 1.5 today, you should look and strongly consider that area if you want a single family home, right? But even look at Fremont. It wasn't just affordability because, like, make no mistake, there are many of these homes in Fremont, $2.4 million today, $2.3 million. Now, while you have others that are in the lower half, like lower than the median price of Fremont, these areas did get very popular. And it goes for a few reasons. Most of these, not all of these, right? These places in Hayward, Richmond, they didn't necessarily have good schools or anything like that. The key about this is a combination of the perceived value for space, right? That was the key about it, the value for space. Because even if you go down even further, you have even more in Fremont. Like Fremont is just a huge winner throughout the times. Just absolute winners, right? I mean, Fremont's almost across the board has done so well. And it was a combination of things. If you think about Fremont is a pretty big city. You have a good amount of single family homes there. At least in 2020, it was still cheaper than others. Today is still, quite frankly, if you want to be in that area with some decent schools, it's still the place to be. But you can see so many different neighborhoods within Fremont have done so well. And it's a combination of good amount of land. You can see the prices. It will range, right? I mean, you can look at Mission Hills, even San Jose area, which is the most expensive part of Fremont. Even their median price is $3.6 million today. And it still went 40%. So it wasn't all purely of, it was affordable per se. It was a combination of the location is still pretty good, right? If you only have to go to work 2-3 days a week, Fremont is a pretty good hub, right? Like why would people at that time in 2020 choose to live in a Palo Alto or a Mountain View when you can buy for significantly less in Fremont? Your commute is still an hour one way when it comes to those commute days, but you're only doing it 3 days a week. So that's a big part of the reason why people have been making these adjustments. But quite frankly, these are all like old information, old news now, right? The most important part is now I would be very interested, and you want to be interested, is saying, okay, really a lot of the return to office was kind of last year. Where are things moving forward now? 2023 moving on forward. That would be the much more interesting stat than the 2020 to 2023 time period where there's been just a big migration out because there's a lot of flexibility of work. Now, the last thing, and this is part of that, back to that rental calculator that I brought up and why it's so important to really don't, you got to be conservative, which I am too, but you also have to be realistic of how much numbers can actually increase. Look at this. The median price of a single family home rose 22% from a year earlier. Was it really this bad? We'll see. I don't think it was this high per se, but I guess it depends on the city and the county. But take a look at this, right? And I guess it depends on the exact time. They're comparing February to February. But to be fair, if you saw the market update that you just saw in March of all the data from March that I just did a few days ago, you'll see the most recent data. And so you can see 22% in 1 year in Alameda County. In Santa Clara County, 20%. Contra Costa County, 13%. San Francisco, 8.5. San Mateo, 7.6, negative 7.6. Right? Some of these I think is a little bit off. I don't know if this is exactly the case, but in general, it has been a very big increase. You can see the numbers from February to March. I think at that point it was like a 12% plus increase in 1 month. Right? So all this stuff that you think about of, oh, it's just like 2%. It's like these remedial numbers. Like things can change quickly. And it's also a combination of just a realization, right? Of people have accrued so much money. They look for a bit. There's only so many homes for sale. So at the end of the day, there's a whole lot more buyers that have entered the market. There is an aspect of fatigue. Like, how would you feel if you're trying to find a place, you got family, want to get good schools, whatever the reasons may be, and you're constantly competing against many offers? How would it feel if you kept losing out, right? Eventually people will be discouraged. They will have to change strategies. Either they can find other areas, they can reduce it to condos and townhomes, or there's other approaches, or they're going to be very aggressive to say, look, I want this house. And because a lot are putting a lot of money down, that's the difference. There is no appraisal risk when you're putting 40% plus down, because it's not going to appraise for less than 10% of that, right? So you already have a natural big buffer. And so that's part of the reason how can prices go up so much. It's because appraisal is not, quite frankly, relevant when you're having so much capital into your offer and as part of your down payment. And so that's why you see this happening across the board. And when things go up, they go up fairly quickly, right? There's a reason why it has increased that way. There is a reason why the Bay Area is leading the country when it comes to growth right now. And a lot of it has to do with the stock market. And a lot of that has to do with this, how well a lot of people are doing. So this hopefully paints you a little bit of a picture of all the different activities, all the news articles that happened this week. If you're wanting to buy or sell, I got a lot of listings coming up. Call or text me. Let's go over a game plan and figure out a strategy that will work for you. There's no shortage of homes right now. Plenty of homes on the market. This is the busiest time all year. Call or text me 408-547-4590. See you next one.